This video is going to be a little different from what I normally do. Today, instead of analyzing someone else's story, I'm going to be telling one of my own. And to do that, I have enlisted the animation help of my good friend Aaron Schmidt, because that's just how you tell stories about your childhood on YouTube now, and I can't personally draw for shit. But while this isn't my usual content, it isn't unrelated to it either. In fact, watching this will probably help you understand my videos and point of view a little better, because this is the story of the very first piece of media that I vividly remember experiencing and what that piece of media did to me. If you hadn't put it together from the title and thumbnail, I'm talking about Resident Evil 2. No, not the remake that hit store shelves just yesterday, but the original survival horror game released by Capcom for the PS1 in January of 1998 and played by 6-year-old me in spring of the next year. Now, you might be thinking, wow, Geoff, that's awfully young to be playing such an intense game, and boy, was it! Most of my video titles are a little bit hyperbolic, but this one is not at all. Playing Resident Evil 2 fucked me up for years, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation. It was grade 1, my first year of proper school, and it took me a little while to make friends in that class. I was an especially shy and awkward kid, as I'm sure will come as a huge surprise to anybody who's seen my channel before, and none of the other kids my age from my neighborhood were in my class, so I eventually ended up gravitating toward another awkward kid. To protect his anonymity, let's just call him Braniel. After a couple months of talking in class and playing at recess, I had ranked up my social link with Braniel and unlocked the go to his house for dinner event, and he enticed me into visiting by mentioning that his family had a PlayStation. There are two things that you gotta understand to fully grasp the enormity of this situation. The first is that just going over to another kid's house by myself, especially at night outside of my immediate neighborhood, was a new experience for me. I had what you might call a helicopter mom who didn't particularly like letting me out of her sight or letting me watch raunchy, corrupting media like The Simpsons. And a result of that is the second thing you need to understand. The 6-year-old me had a very limited concept of what video games even were. I had played Mario Kart 64 at my neighbor Daniel's house a few times and lost every single one because he knew all the shortcuts like a cheating bastard, but other than that, I'd never really touched a video game. My mom wouldn't even let me visit the arcade on the ferry because the bad kids hung out there, and when I heard playground whispers about the PlayStation, I remember thinking it must be an arcade too, since I didn't really know what consoles were at the time. So when I heard that Braniel had one in his house, my mind was a little blown, and even when he explained to me that no, he did not have a bunch of arcade machines in his home, I was still so down to go over there. But I was still stepping into a totally unfamiliar scenario, and I was coming into it from just about the most sheltered childhood a person can have without learning to churn butter. Needless to say, I was not at all prepared for what awaited me at Braniel's house, and needless to say, I was excited. I was so excited, in fact, that I made my mom go out and buy me a PlayStation magazine so that I could do research ahead of time. Specifically, this magazine, which I spent hours poring over after school every day that week. I wanted to play a lot of things I read about in that issue, and in retrospect, reading and rereading it in conjunction with getting a Game Boy Color and Pokemon Blue for my birthday a month later is probably the biggest contributing factor to my lifelong fascination with JRPGs and anime as an offshoot of that. So you basically have that magazine to blame for my whole channel, and you can't even write in to complain about it because they don't exist anymore. I just made myself sad. Anyway, amid all of the enticing images in that magazine, one in particular stood out to me. A 2-page spread featuring a goofy cartoon skeleton advertising a game called Medieval. I didn't know what kind of game it was, but the cartoon skeleton looked funny, and that was enough to lodge the game in my memory. And I didn't remember a single one of the articles, so never let anyone tell you that advertising doesn't work. A few days passed, and the time came for me to head to Braniel's house. Once there, we played a bit of Skull Monkeys, a really cool claymation platformer, and because Braniel had cool parents, 2 other games that I was way too young for, Siphon Filter and Tomb Raider, which are difficult enough when you're not figuring out the ropes of 3D action gaming for the first time in your life. I barely understood Siphon Filter's terrorist murdering action in those innocent pre-9/11 days, so that didn't really bother me, but repeatedly getting mauled to death by tigers in Tomb Raider left me more than a little stressed out. And perhaps noticing my frustration, Braniel asked, Is there anything you want to play? Now, my knowledge of the PlayStation library was very limited at that point in my life, but I didn't want to seem like a total noob, so in a panic, I scanned my memory for images from that magazine, and my brain returned the cartoon skeleton. And now would probably be a good time to mention that I am terrible with names. So I said to Braniel, "There's this game with a skeleton, something evil. Do you have that one?" "Oh yeah, we do. Let me get it." "Awesome. Thanks." He came back into the room with the game in hand, slotted it into the PlayStation, and handed me the controller. Needless to say, it was not the game with the cute cartoon skeleton. What I saw next is still burned into my mind. A stylized umbrella logo, an army of walking corpses closing in on a lone cop, a frantic car chase, a terrifying jump scare. Well, okay, in retrospect, it was pretty goofy, followed by a fiery oil tanker crash. It's not an exaggeration to say that those scenes played out in my nightmares for weeks afterwards, and I know that seems like a pretty extreme reaction to have to monster by mistake level CGI cutscenes, but you have to remember, the scariest thing that I had seen up to that point in my life was the Snow Ghost episode of Scooby-Doo. So I was already horrified, and I hadn't even started playing yet. When the game did start, I immediately walked backwards into the flaming wreckage, and in the time it took me to figure out the tank controls, I'd already been bitten by zombies twice. Once I had my bearings, I tried to snake my way through the oncoming horde, and did a very poor job of it. I was overwhelmed and saw my own guts torn open before my eyes, and my blood splatter on the screen before I even reached the alleyway. Again, looking back, those effects were cheesy as shit, but to a kid who only saw blood when he scraped his arm, they were freaky enough. "Aw man, that doesn't count," said Braniel. "You have to try again." Now, at this point, my brain was screaming, "No, no, 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 no!" But for some reason, between the Tina Belcher noises it was making, my mouth said, "Sure." And so I started down the road to hell again, this time with a bit of guidance, which did not help much. "You can run around those zombies easy, you just have to turn with the left and right buttons." "Thanks," I said as one of those zombies chewed on my neck. Still, I did do better that time around and managed to make it to the apparent safety of the gun shop, where I was able to relax and collect my bearings, as well as a few handgun bullets that— "Oh fuck, there's fucking zombies coming in the door and I don't know how to fucking turn around behind this counter. What do I do? I'm dead." Oh! "Thanks, PlayStation. I got that." "Aw, dude, you gotta try one more time." No, I do not. And furthermore, I do not want to. "Good day, sir." Well, that's how it sounded in my head. It came out more like— Luckily, my mom showed up a few minutes later to get me out of there, and she was almost as horrified to learn what kind of games I'd been playing as I was to actually, play them. On the way home, I was straight up fear hallucinating, seeing zombies lurking in every dark corner we passed, and I kept seeing that when I tried to go to sleep that night, which necessitated my parents reinstalling the nightlight that they had recently finally convinced me to get rid of. And that bad boy stayed in my room until I hit grade 7, doing pretty well fuck all to ward off my regular nightmares and night terrors, which included such lovely subject matter as being trapped in my house surrounded by zombies, being eaten by zombies, and being trapped in a house with zombies on every TV and no way to turn them off. From that point forward, I could not handle seeing zombies in any context. When I first played Ocarina of Time around age 10, I got as far as turning into adult Link, walked into a crowd of redeads in Clocktown, and promptly slammed the power switch on my N64 and sent that shit back to Blockbuster. It would take me like 7 years to get around to trying it again. And I once had a full-blown panic attack and needed to be escorted out of a very cheap, very cheesy haunted house because I was convinced that a rubber dummy of a corpse would get up to grab me. To be clear, I didn't think that it was an actual zombie, I just couldn't even handle the idea of being approached by someone in a zombie costume. Also, as a side effect, I got anxiety spikes just watching the PS1 boot up screen, but thankfully those came and went about as quickly as the screen itself. So, yeah, Resident Evil 2 fucked me up, but it wasn't all bad news. Braniel's parents felt so awful about the whole scarring my young mind for life thing that they offered to sell me an older, slightly broken PlayStation they had in storage for a fraction of its retail cost. You had to hold down the disc spindle with a bit of masking tape to get it running, but other than that, it worked brilliantly. And so, as a direct result of that traumatic night, I went from being a kid with no video games to a kid with, well, still no actual video games, but at least I had a few demo discs, one taken from that issue of OPM and another two given to me by Braniel along with the console. And acquiring that console and those discs ruined my childhood in a different way, changing me from an outgoing, sports-enjoying youth to the nerdy homebody you all know and tolerate today. Before and even after I got my hands on some real games of my own, I played and replayed the heck out of the demos for Crash, Roll Cage, Metal Gear Solid when my mom wasn't around, and especially Spyro until the opening moments of each game were burned into my brain over top of the terrifying zombie stuff. There was also a demo for Medieval on one of those discs, but for some reason, young me wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I spent many years being too spooked of zombies in particular and horror elements in general to try a lot of things. But here's the thing about that. I knew that my fear of those totally fictional beings was irrational. I knew that it was holding me back from enjoying games and movies that I might otherwise really love. And I had plenty of other things holding me back that I couldn't change, like being gangly and clumsy, and what the doctors called chronic crippling handsomeness. So I took my fear of zombies as a sort of challenge. Once I got out of that overlong nightlight phase, every few months or so I'd take a shot at reading a book like The Walking Dead or The Zombie Survival Guide, or watching a horror movie. Usually that would result in a week or two of me waking up from vivid zombie siege nightmares in a cold sweat, but over time I brought that down to just a few days. And as I grew older and learned more about how goddamn terrifying the real world actually is, eventually the anxiety I had about corpse people eating my face meat seemed quaint and wholesome in comparison. As a result of that long process, I learned to enjoy being scared. And horror, zombie horror especially, ended up becoming one of my favorite genres across all kinds of media. You don't have to look far to see me praising the likes of High School of the Dead, I Am a Hero, School Live, and of course Zombieland Saga on this channel, and many horror titles number among my favorite games and movies of all time. Which just goes to show that sometimes what doesn't kill you can actually make you stronger, or at least give you a stronger affinity for schlocky acting and gratuitous practical effects. I did eventually go back to Conquer Ocarina of Time, and eventually I even played through the HD remake of the original Resident Evil. But I've never gotten around to finishing Resident Evil 2, partly because I just haven't had the time, and partly because, well, it's aged like milk and gone from scaring me way too much to scaring me not at all. So even though it's got arguably the best designed survival gameplay of the original series, it doesn't quite scratch my horror itch the way that the RE1 remake does. But with the new remake I mentioned finally out, that much at least has changed, and I finally have a chance to see if the person I've grown into is tough enough to handle what the kid that I wasn't. Well, I mean, obviously I'd better be. I was 6 then and I'm 26 now, but okay, look, I'm just trying to set up a segue to tell you guys that we've finally got our streaming hardware set up in our new place, and thus I will be streaming Resident Evil 2 on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/mothersbasementofficial, tonight and on an irregular basis until I finish it. So you can come to see for yourself whether I've really gotten over it and have some laughs at my expense when it becomes clear that I haven't. But that's coming a little bit later. If you're looking for something to do right now, you could try learning stuff. This video was brought to you by Skillshare, an online learning community that offers thousands of classes in just about anything that might interest you, really. Writing, programming, running a business, editing videos, speaking Japanese, cooking. They've even got classes for learning how to be better at Pokemon Go. I am a firm believer in the idea that a life spent learning is a life well lived, and even though my job keeps me pretty busy, Skillshare makes it easy to dive into subjects that interest me whenever I've got the time. They let you know exactly how long each lesson is going to take when you start it, and with a premium membership, you can try out as many lessons as you like, all for under $10 a month. For instance, if you want to learn how to draw good like Aaron instead of drawing like, me, they have plenty of courses in illustration, design, and animation to get you started there. And if you want to put together a video like this one, they also teach creative writing and video editing on Skillshare as well. If you'd like to learn more about how you can learn more, go to skl.sh/basement4 or click the link in the doobly-doo to try it out for yourself. The first 500 people to sign up with that link will get 2 months of Skillshare absolutely free. You heard that right, it won't cost you a dime. So go ahead and start learning learning what you want to the way you want to with Skillshare today. That's the story of how Resident Evil 2 traumatized me, but I'm sure I'm not the only one with a story of how a piece of media scared the crap out of them as a kid. So if you've got one of your own, share it with me in the comments below. And while you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button if you liked the video, of course, and hit the subscribe button if you want to see more Mother's Basement videos every week. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.